Hey there, welcome back to Beacon in the Storm. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Carlton. Today I have a very special guest with us. I have James Thorne, who's an entrepreneur. Hey there, James, how's it going?
Doing great, Bradford. Thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely, I really appreciate it. Where do you hail from, James?
Fort Worth, Texas.
Ah, beautiful. So are you experiencing like the crazy cold, or is it flying between cold and okay?
It is. It goes back and forth. Yeah, it depends on what day it is.
Absolutely. I'm in sunny Las Vegas, but it's currently sunny and raining here, which is kind of interesting. All right, so James,
Yeah.
I don't usually do a lot of talking on this show. I usually leave it to my guests to kind of lead us where we're going. And so why don't we begin by just telling us a little bit about yourself, please?
Oh, great. Yeah. Like I said, Fort Worth, Texas, family. Got three boys. Learning a lot in that. I used to work in the church world for 10 years, helping media communications, groups and missions. Left the church to start my own company, helping nonprofits and churches with their fundraising, marketing, connecting community. That's led into some other really great ventures and started a nonprofit to also help with funding. Yeah, at my core, I love creating space for people to do what they love, but also making that connection for people to really just enjoy their work.
Wonderful. All right. So before we ever began, I told you a little bit about my show and the purpose of my show. It's to speak to men and help lead them to Christ. And before we do that, I always like to start with what I think is a simple question, but can be kind of complicated. What does it mean to be a man?
Yeah. Yeah. When I saw that question, I had a hard time penning it myself. I really just kind of took a step back and was like, okay, to me, the question is, what does it mean to be human?
Mm.
It's, yes, I think we're uniquely wired in many different ways from man and woman, but at the end of the day, what it means to be that, I think, is just what it means to be human and how God created us to be and what that looks like on this earth. So that's kind of what made me go there, was as far as being human.
Absolutely. I've had quite a few guests who list off qualities like they're courageous, they get the job done, they do that. Like, aren't women able to do that too? And then they usually him and
Right. Right. I was like, yeah, I feel like it both sides, but I understand that we're wired differently.
Absolutely. So I'll kind of the kind of common theme I hear from most of my guests is the biblical perspective of men being provider and protector. And what are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's really interesting you brought that up. We haven't even talked about this, but lately I've had a lot of discussion with people about that we're not even the provider at all. And it's actually been a huge door open to, I think, the faith side of this discussion where God is your provider. And I think it's really hard for men to get there. And I think I've been forced to get there over the past few years, where God has been teaching me lesson after lesson after lesson. He's the only one providing for me. And every time I feel like I'm doing it, he strips away what's in front of me. And so to answer that, I would say you're not a provider. You're a vessel for God to provide through you. And I think that's really hard to hear sometimes. So for those of you listening, I understand. It's not like me saying I have that figured out in 100%. Oh yeah, I know God provides for me in every way, in every aspect. I run into that wall too, and feel like I have to figure it out. Feel like I have to do it when really I'm not doing anything.
Absolutely. I fully agree. All right. Now, a little earlier, you said the faith side of this conversation. So before we can really get people to understand their relationship with God, relationship with Christ, we have to kind of understand what this topic or concept of faith is. What does it mean to have faith? So I want to ask, why is faith so important to this conversation?
Yeah, I would tie it also to part of that, like providing being an example, but faith in something else, right? Like it's hard for anyone to put their trust and faith in a different person that they don't know. And especially someone they can't even see. So I think when we talk about our faith in God and why that's important, I believe we're designed, it's written in the word, we're designed to connect with others, and we're designed to be vulnerable with others. We're designed to live in community with other people. It's naturally why even this past few years has been really hard for people in depression and loneliness because of the way the world's been bent, and we're designed that way. So faith being something that can be really difficult for a lot of people because they have to put their trust in something else. I think it's important because we're designed to do that. So when we're willing to get there and put our faith in God as their ultimate, then all those other things get added to you, right? All those other things that you're looking for in community and people, relationships, I think get covered because you're going to get hurt. You're going to get, probably abused and thrown sideways because we're broken people. So I think faith in God is the answer. And I think a lot of people that would read the Bible and say that believe it, but it's hard to do.
Yeah.
In our world today.
All right. Now, the hard question. My audience is 80% men, 18 to 35. The vast majority of them aren't necessarily believers. They began following me because of entrepreneurship content and business money making stuff, and so I'm working to lead them to the Lord. How do we do that? How do you and I, or pretty much anybody on this planet, lead someone to Christ?
That's good. Yeah, that's really good. I think God designs each person differently to connect with other people differently. It's why there's 1,000 churches just in so many miles, right? Like there's different churches that exist and people coming together because we're all wired different. I really live my life trying to set that example and just build community with others around me so that they know I truly do just care and love them for who they are and where they're at, because I do believe that God does the same for us. And my neighbor's a good example. Across the street, I'm believing for this guy, and I'm just showing up whenever I see him and walk across the street, and we chat for 20 minutes and we just connect. And I just want to hear about his life. And there's a lot going on that blow my mind. I'm like, wow, I can't imagine what you're going through. But I just want to be there for people. So in that, I think builds trust, which then opens the door for faith for people to go, okay, there's something different about you. And then I get a little more direct in conversation when I feel like there's been a lot of trust built. And just going, hey, this is what I believe and where I'm at. How does that sit with you?
Sure.
And I've actually, a neighbor that moved a few years ago, I led him to the Lord. And it was really cool how we just built friendship. We started running together in the mornings. We started doing stuff together. And then all of a sudden, I take him to lunch and I'm like, who's Jesus to you? And we ended up walking to the parking lot and giving his life to the Lord and baptized and all that. But
wow. And
I just say that only because that's really challenged me. Right. I don't say that to boast, because before that, it was a decade, right? Before I personally led someone to the Lord. But I've been really challenged by that to know, like, hey, you're in this place for a reason, your neighborhood, your area. Get out there and meet them, get to know them, and set that example that hopefully leads to that.
Wonderful. So you live by example and let them ask the question, essentially, of, is there something there? How do you feel about those evangelists out there who just go straight up to someone and say, you're going to go to hell if you don't believe in Jesus?
Yeah, I've actually asked them. I've literally asked people that stand on that box at the corner downtown, how does this work for you? I'm just curious, like, what are you seeing? And they didn't have a whole lot to share in that interaction, and I wasn't trying to prove them wrong. I think it's just more, again, we all have different personalities, and maybe there's someone walking by that needed that in the moment because they're dealing with something specific. My uncle is a retired police officer, and he's got some crazy stories of the way God's used him in the field that has approached certain people that never would have been approached or been approachable if it wasn't for someone in the blue, the suit, and God showed up. So who am I to say God can't use those people too? But I am curious. I'm like, man, how is that working for you? Because it doesn't work for me.
Absolutely. Okay, so we talked about people who are haven't been exposed to the faith? What about people who may have already been part of the faith, may have been raised in the faith and had a commitment and a love for God, but at some point maybe something happened, they fell off, they lost that faith? How do we help them back in?
That's a really good question. I had a conversation recently with someone that they're seeing a lot of people show up at church and a lot of movement where people are showing up. And I've actually had the opposite, where I'm seeing more people leave. Friends that are disconnected, people that longtime friends that are getting divorced and leaving their faith. And all this, I'm just like, wow, I'm so confused. Where I start in that is going to the point of where they separated and saying, where was Jesus in that moment for you? Right? And what were you doing in that pursuit of Jesus that you say you believed before? And I think there's always a breakdown there. Again, I don't know everyone's story as I say this, but the breakdown of when's the last time you actually went to Jesus, right? Was it a moment ago or was it last Sunday, right? When's the next time you're going to Jesus? Is it for lunch when you pray, or is it going to be in this next conversation you're about to have in a meeting? And I think a lot of people, they get disconnected and further away from going to Jesus continually. That's where the separation is. And they're like, wow, he's not here for me. He's not doing anything. And I'm like, well, really, you're not doing your part of that relationship. And I think he's always there for you, just waiting for you to come to him. And it comes down to my core belief of we are nothing without him. And because we need Jesus. I always put that in the sense of because we need Jesus, right? At the end of the day, it's because we need him. And I have to do my best to constantly go after that. And I'm in no way got it figured out, no way perfect. But I do find myself now throughout the day going into a conversation, even before this call, literally before the call, I said, Lord, bless this conversation. I don't know what I'm going to say. Let it be you, not me. Do you do things like that? Right? And so then go back to that moment where you felt like it really was separated and what did your walk with Christ look like in that moment? I'm guessing it doesn't look like much of anything. And I can usually prove it with guys I meet with too, that they're like, oh, I really struggled this week and things were going on. I'm like, well, how much time do you spend on the word? How did you go to Jesus? And I didn't really have time. Okay, great. Let's start there. Let's start there. So
I love your answer. It's probably the most practical answer I've ever had anybody give. A lot of people say,
really?
You got to pray on it. You got to get community around you, but you're figure out what went wrong. I love it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I guess part of what I do too, I'm always helping solve problems. And I think that's it, right? Something had to have gone wrong for you to make that decision. And it's okay if you choose to continue to make that decision yourself. But at the end of the day, if we want to actually get to the root, there's probably something there in a disconnect that you weren't really spending time on the word. There's a lot of people that love to come back and bash the church they were at or the people and whatever. And that's fine. People do hurt people. Churches hurt people. But at the end of the day, Jesus doesn't. And I'm like, so then where was Jesus in all of that for you? And what was he doing while that was happening?
Beautiful. All right, James, what is it that you are doing today to help promote the word?
That's great. I actually am a part of a ministry that I volunteer my time to be a coach for men that are struggling with lust and pornography. And they can come in from any angle. They don't have to be Christ followers to, most of the time they are, because people that are dealing with it believe there's something wrong with it. And they're usually Christ followers in that sense. But that's opening the doors to connect people to Jesus. And really, those root issues we all grow up with and things that we deal with. And if I'm not pointing them to Jesus in every conversation, I'm failing, because he's the only one that can change them. So I spend a lot of time in that, because I really believe that's helping break down walls in families in future and generations. But I think my neighborhood, like I mentioned in the beginning, that's my ground. That's where I start. And a lot of people say it's just going after the one. You just spend time with one, and I do believe that. You just pray about that one person, spend time with them, and either the door will open or not, and then you go pray for someone else, and you talk to them, get to know them, build a relationship. And we grew up my dad's actually a pastor. I grew up next door to a couple that we, don't necessarily agree with their lifestyle. And we just became friends with them. And my dad did so many things for them. Really meant a lot to me because it helps shape and know that it doesn't really matter what we agree with or not. We're meant to love, and Christ being seen through that. And there's been really cool stories from just them coming back and going, there are people in our neighborhood, in our block, whatever, that have disowned us, don't like us, don't care about us, but you guys cared. And you would have, and honestly, they said you would have been the first person that we would have thought to throw us out, knowing your belief. And my dad's like, we're just here to love you. You don't have to agree even with the way we live our life, but we're human.
Well, that's fantastic. Can we go back? So you say you work with men in order to get over pornography addiction. My audience is kind of that demographic most susceptible to it at the moment. You said there are kind of common root issues. You mind discussing those? Because maybe someone who's watching this may not know that they have a problem until they see that there is a problem.
That's great. Yeah, for those of you listening, not to make you feel convicted with where you're at, but the stats are just real. 70-something% of men are dealing with it on a consistent basis. I think actually it's higher, 70, close to 80%, and then 70% of pastors are dealing with it. So that just shows it's just real. The solution to that is letting someone else know about it, right? Breaking down those walls. But the root, it's not the act of what you're doing, looking at pornography or lust and whatever you're doing in that moment, is something that's coming from some sort of root that from your past or that you're dealing with. And most don't even know they are. One that's most common that comes up with the guys that I meet with ends up being a statement that is, if you really truly knew the real me, you wouldn't love me. And it's been hard to get there for guys to really get to that point, but it's true. I think we all are afraid if someone really knew the true us, then you wouldn't love me. And sometimes it does break down walls in marriages, and when things come out and we're dealing with it and we're taking care of the issue, because wives are finding out and they're hurt and they're crushed and it's hard. But what I love to say in that moment is God knows you more than you know yourself, and he wants you and he loves you. And it's a good healing moment for them to get to that understanding and believe it. Because there is someone that already has loved them, regardless how much damage they've done to themselves and others. And, but yeah, that's one of the biggest root things that comes up. And then there's a lot of hurt from their dads. Things that, yes, there's abuse in some, and it's awful. It's terrible to hear stories of things in abuse, but it does exist. But just as simple as their dad just didn't know how to show affection, right? It's the handshake after hanging out. It's the, not saying I'm proud of you and I love you. And it's not that was intentional, like they were trying to be. They just don't know how to show the affection. So they're now seeking for that because we desire those things in our fathers, and now it's being sought after in other things. And I had the same experience growing up. My dad loved me. I know he did. He did a lot for me. But it was hard for him to give hugs, and I just wanted a hug. He knows that now, and we've talked through it, and he's really, we've broken in tears, and he's apologized. And I was like, okay, it's not your fault. You're human too. But I think we just need to share with what we want and what we're seeking for, and allow God to take care of the rest.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that, James. James, how do people find you? How can they reach out to you if they want to get in touch?
Great question. Honestly, I'm tied to all the things I'm working on. So if you went to quirkgrowth.com, that's the for-profit company I'm working for, vehicleforgood.com, the nonprofit. It's really easy to find me on those platforms. I'm on LinkedIn, James Thorne, and I'm sure you can share some links, but I appreciate you doing that.
Absolutely. All right, James, I want to say just honestly, thank you so much for your time. Your answers were very thoughtful. They were so considered. And honestly, this is one of the better interviews I've done. And I've had some high up people. This was one that just felt real, and I truly appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bradford. That means a lot.
All right. And for everybody else, I'm going to remind you all, keep looking for the light in the tempest. God will show you the way.